Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the reading of the Monetary Policy Statement for February 2025. This will be the first statement for this year, but it will also be the first among 4 statements that will be read over the year. As you may have noted, we released a press release indicating that we'll be having 4 statements each year. And this is the first. The next one will be in May, on 8th May 2025. The third one on 7th August 2025. And the fourth one on 6th November 2025, as scheduled. However, the MPC maintains the flexibility to hold additional meetings should the situation warrant, given the economic developments at the time. So with that background, I'd like to begin by introducing members of BOU staff who are here. I'll start with the Deputy Governor, who's the chair of the MPC statement, who's right at the head of the table. Mr. Mike Atingego, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Kenneth.
On the left of the Deputy Governor is Mr. David Kalyango. He's the Executive Director Supervision and member of the MPC. You're most welcome, Mr. David Kalyango. On the right of the Deputy Governor is Dr. Adam Mugume, who's the Executive Director of Research. You're most welcome.
Thank you.
My name is Kenneth Egesa. I'll be your moderator. We will have the reading of the statement by the Deputy Governor, after which we will allow questions from the journalists in the room and those of you who are joining us online. With those remarks, I now invite the Deputy Governor to lead us through the statement.
Thank you, Director Communications, and a very good afternoon, all our listeners and viewers. Welcome to the reading of the Monetary Policy Statement for the month of February 2025. On 6th of February 2025, the Bank of Uganda Monetary Policy Committee maintained the central bank rate, CBR, at 9.75%. Domestic inflation has evolved as previously projected, supported by monetary policy actions and reforms in the interbank foreign exchange market, which have contributed to the deepening of the foreign exchange market and the stability of the exchange rate. Additionally, favorable food and energy prices, along with the relatively low global inflation, have also helped support domestic inflation. Over the 12 months leading up to January 2025, annual headline and core inflation averaged 3.4% and 3.8% respectively. However, annual headline and core inflation in the month of January 2025 rose to 3.6% and 4.2% from 3.3% and 3.9% in December 2024, mainly driven by an increase in services inflation, particularly in passenger transport services. Despite the seasonal rise in food prices, near-term inflation appears well contained. However, the short to medium-term outlook is more uncertain than usual, with risks largely stemming from the external environment. Accordingly, the Bank of Uganda forecasts that average annual core inflation will be between 4 and 5% in 2025. It is expected to stabilize around the target in the medium term. Of course, there are several risks that could affect this inflation forecasts. Inflation could be higher than projected if, 1, the domestic growth is stronger, driven by increased investments in the extractive industry, particularly mining and drilling, and effective government program implementation. Also, the geopolitical conflicts could escalate, disrupting the global supply chains further. In addition, extreme weather events and long-term environmental shifts affect agricultural output, which could result into price hikes. And lastly, if the US dollar appreciates strongly against major currencies, exerting pressure on the shilling, increasing import costs, and posing inflationary risks. Conversely, inflation could be lower than projected if 1. Stronger capital flows cause the exchange rate to appreciate. 2. While oil prices decline due to a slowdown in global growth as a result of trade wars. Overall, the risk to inflation outlook are assessed to be on the upside. On economic activity, we see this continuing to strengthen. The business confidence remains positive despite headwinds from the challenging global environment as well as the constrained private sector credit growth. The latest quarterly GDP release from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, UBOS, indicates that real GDP growth in the first quarter of 2024-25 was 6.7%, up from 6.2% in the fourth quarter of 2023-24 and 5.6% in the first quarter of 2023-2024, driven by a significant recovery in industrial activity. Business sentiment suggests that economic activity remains buoyant. Going forward, economic growth is still projected at 6% to 6.5% in financial year 2024-25 and 7% in the outer years, supported by a stable macroeconomic environment, foreign direct investment towards the extractive sector, strategic government interventions aimed at wealth creation, increased agricultural production, and anticipated oil revenues. However, there is still considerable uncertainty surrounding this growth outlook. We see that growth could be lower than projected if we have adverse weather conditions which could hinder food crop harvests, tight financing conditions, and the need for more domestic budget financing due to reduced external financing of projects. Then the global developments, including heightened risks of trade conflicts, as well as disruption of trade and supply chains, which could result into slower global growth. And finally, the global financial conditions, if this tighten due to emerging challenges adversely affecting the Ugandan economy. Conversely, growth could be higher than projected if, one, there is increased investments in the extractive industry, and secondly, government interventions and accommodative monetary policy boost growth beyond expectations. Overall, the risks to the growth outlook are tilted to the downside. The MPC noted that although inflation is expected to rise in the near term, it will return to target in the medium term. Uncertainties from the global developments could cause inflation to rise faster and disrupt economic activity. This situation necessitates a cautious approach to monetary policy. As a result, the MPC kept the central bank rate CBR at 9.75%. The CBR bonds stayed at minus 2 percentage points, and the rate discount and the bank rates remain at 3 and 4 percentage points above the CBR respectively. Therefore, the rate discount rate is 12.75% and the bank rate is at 13.75%. The MPC believes that the current CBR level is adequate to control inflation while fostering Uganda's economic growth and socio-economic transformation. Future adjustments to the CBR will depend on new data and evaluation of risks. That marks the end of the reading of the February 2025 monetary policy statements. Thank you for your kind attention, and God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Deputy Governor, Mr. Michael Atingi Ego, for the reading of the statement. We will now give an opportunity to those in the room and those online to raise your questions so that the Deputy Governor and his team can respond to them. Please introduce yourself and the media house you represent, and then go ahead and present your question. Yes, please.
My name is Hakim Wampamba, and I work with NBS Television. Deputy Governor, if you would just be kind to take us through what the Bank of Uganda thinks of the Trump policies and their subsequent impact on the Ugandan economy. You have hinted a little bit about it here in the statement, but I think you want to be a little more particular relating to the tariffs. And you said fund freezes. Also, if you could just be able to take us through the action on the money markets and the currency markets, at least for the month of February. We shall be very, very happy to pick a comment from that. Thanks.
Today is only the 6th of February.
Oh, for the month, from where you sit, you could just be able to give us an overview of how the markets have been. We shall be interested in knowing how the securities markets are really performing as of now from the view of the central bank. Thanks.
Okay, we'll take those questions.
Okay, I'll just mention very briefly the impact of the Trump policies. I think like I mentioned in the reading of the monetary policy statement, what we normally call the trade wars, that is the tariff escalation. Well, you're aware, of course, what happened in the case of Mexico and Canada. They have kind of like paused for a time being while they're talking. I read last that to give it 1 month for the talks. But if the tariffs were to be implemented, take for example now in the case of China, we are likely to see the domestic price levels in the affected countries go up. And to the extent that some of these are big players in the global trading, it will affect the global inflation. And of course, Uganda is not in an island. We will end up importing some of that inflation into our countries. And that means we'll have to see how to tighten monetary policy going forward. And of course, depending on how the central banks react to this, particularly the Fed, if the inflation is going to trend above their target as a result of this tariff escalation, then they're likely to raise their policy rate. And already some of the markets have begun factoring that in, partly explaining why the dollar has been strengthening in the recent past. And then the other one is, of course, what does that mean for our exchange rate if the policy rate in the central banks of the diverse countries are raised as a result of this? It might affect the currency through depreciation, and that has got its own implications. The pass-through of imported inflation via a depreciated exchange rate, which means that still we have to take monetary policy actions. And then there are others to do with the immigration policies, right? If indeed there's going to be a deportation, so depending on the number of Ugandans who are affected, it could affect our remittances to the economy. And that would also result into reduced FX supply to our market. And then the aid, you might have heard that you said most of the offices have been closed worldwide. So whatever they have been financing in terms of the projects is going to come to a close. And depending on what government, how government is going to manage it, of course, it's still going to affect the government budget. If government decides to take on some of those shortfalls, it means either they have to reconsider the budget or they have to increase funding for it via budget deficit. But we do not know yet what government is going to do as a result of these aid cuts. So we wait for a firm confirmation from the government on how they plan to handle this. So in brief, these are some of the issues that I would maybe mention briefly on the Trump policies. Let me ask Adam to add something, or you speak to the money securities market, Adam.
Thank you, Governor. I think you have explained well on the Trump policies. It is still early to judge where we are likely to end. Only to say what I can add on briefly is that if you recall in the previous rounds of forecasts, we had assumed that the Fed would continue easing monetary policy, but then we saw So I was trying to explain that in the last rounds, we had made assumption that the Fed will continue easing their monetary policy. Why that is important is that, but in their last monetary policy meeting also they paused, mentioning that core inflation remains elevated in US. And so the challenge with that, or the effect of that on the Ugandan economy is that you tend to have a situation where portfolio investors who wanted to bring in money would say, okay, if the Fed is likely to maintain their rates high, why should we bring the money into Uganda? Like a pause in terms of capital inflows. So that's what and that ultimately, as the Deputy Governor said, feeds into the exchange rate volatility. So that is something to watch because the way it evolves, whether the monetary policy in the advanced economies will be tightened, will be lowered, or they will pause monetary policy easing, that ultimately causes some volatility into domestic money market, domestic exchange rate market. So the second question on how the money market has evolved, just to say in January we saw the yields slightly edging up, both in the secondary market and the auctions. We saw, for example, like the 1 year bill is now at around 13.4, rising by around 40 basis points, I think, compared to December. And across the yield curve, across the various tenors, you see that yields are rose. Partly, and this also feeds into what we saw in the interbank rate. We saw that interbank rates were around 11.6, also edged up in January compared to December. Overall, we see a bit of tight liquidity conditions. Now, it is a double-edged sword. On one hand, that tight liquidity condition helps us on the exchange rate stability, but at the same time, it can also be added in terms of add-on to constraints in financing. Part of the liquidity condition we see in the money market and also in a tight rising of yields is caused by two aspects. One, government expenditure partly is in terms of foreign exchange. For example, if government raises the taxes or borrows, but imports goods or pays for services, some of it which is debt, it is automatically a drain in terms of the shilling liquidity. And that's what we see in the money market. The other aspect is that expenditure has not, at least in the first half of the year, was not as strong. Again, is because of, and once you correct, the taxes are overperformed, but the expenditure side is not as rapid as the tax overperformance. So that also partly drains out liquidity. But overall, we think that that's temporary. In the second half of the year, we think that that is going to reverse. And another aspect is that government, at least in the 2 quarters of the financial year, we see that they were paying promptly in terms of securities that were maturing. So if you recall some time back, you would see that Bank of Uganda would pay on government's behalf, but then there would be a delay on when the government would reimburse Bank of Uganda. But in the first half of the year, we see that the government was prompt in repaying, and that is also partly contributed to a bit of tightness in the liquidity, therefore resulting into higher yields and higher interbank rates. But all that liquidity condition, as I said, to emphasize, is that is partly helping us in terms of maintaining stability in the exchange rate, given the elevated global uncertainty we are seeing. Thank you, DG.
Thank you, DG, and Dr. Mugume. We'll take some more questions. Yes, please go ahead.
Abubeka Mwangi, China Global Television Network. About the US cuts, are they likely to make life more expensive for Ugandans? Are we likely to see job losses? And what strategies should Uganda and Africa, probably at large, adopt to reduce reliance on Western aid? Thank you so much.
We'll take some additional questions so that we have a go at them at once. Okay, Deputy Governor, there are only those 2 questions for you to respond to.
Yes, thank you, Abubakar Muonge. Certainly, these aid cuts, there are already a number of Ugandans who have been directly affected, those who have been working with the USAID agencies, spread across so many sectors. I think you journalists have been reading from the newspapers. It's just cutting across a number of sectors. So those job losses, certainly, those who have lost their jobs, life's going to be hard for them. Now, also, we need to look at the beneficiaries of the services that this aid was supporting. Now, depending on how government manages these cuts, if they can be accommodated in the budget, then maybe that will continue. But in the event that government doesn't have the resources to accommodate in full what these services have been, those beneficiaries will have an impact, will be adversely impacted. So in terms of the budget itself, again, it's certainly going to tighten the budget in terms of looking for resources, reprioritizing, and as you do the reprioritization, it means that other sectors are going to be affected. So there are quite a number of implications depending on how this is going to be managed. How does it affect exchange rate? Also, it depends on the import content of some of these aid. If the import content was quite big, maybe it may not. But if government were to take on board some of the services, it means that the demand of foreign currency to continue the importation of this would go up. And depending on the magnitude, it could have a slight impact on the currency. But I think whatever it takes, I think the Minister of Finance together with the Bank of Uganda have what it takes to try to manage the thing in an orderly manner. Now, in terms of the policy response, I think this goes to what the government has been really preaching, particularly championed by His Excellency the President, about we growing our own industrial base. So, for example, the vaccines, you've heard that the President has been very, very concerned, and he's been championing the growth of this vaccine sector in Uganda. So I think we need to really see to what extent can we reduce dependence on some of the things here. How can we promote more regional value chains, all right, so that we are able to support ourselves when such a thing happens. And then, of course, it also raises another issue. To what extent should we continue depending on some of this aid going forward? So maybe we need to rethink of strategies of how to grow our own capacity to minimize the dependence on some of this. So it's bad, but also it does present an opportunity for us to rethink of the way forward. That's brief what I can answer, Abubakar Muwanga.
Yes, we have a hand at the back. Please introduce yourself and raise your question.
Thank you. Namugabe Eva is my name, from Radio 1. Yes, Deputy Governor, about any take about the arrests in the 60 billion issue. The Minister of Finance came out and confirmed that some of its staff were arrested. Maybe we can hear from you as well.
So what do you want to hear from me?
Anything, either confirming or...
Look, you're referring to the Minister of Finance. This is Bank of Uganda. So I think the PSS issued a statement on that. So I have nothing more to add.
Okay. Did I see a hand across? Do you have the questions on YouTube? Okay, we'll come to the questions on YouTube. Okay, so we have a question here from, the name is not clear. It says, when you say expenditure side has overperformed, what do you mean? What does that mean about the planned fiscal consolidation? Unfortunately, this person hasn't provided their name. So I'll repeat. When you say the expenditure side has overperformed, what do you mean? And what does that mean about the planned fiscal consolidation? I think this was a question, this is a question relating to the answer Dr. Mugume you gave about the taxes overperforming, but maybe you could clarify.
You are right, Kenneth. I was referring to overperformance of the tax revenue collection. I think we saw in the first half of the year taxes overperformed by more than 300 billion. So that's what I was referring to, not expenditure. Actually, expenditure underperformed compared to what had been projected.
Okay, we don't see any more questions. So I take it that the Deputy Governor and his team have adequately responded to the questions you had.
Thank you.
All right, so we have come to a close of this reading of the Monetary Policy Statement for February 2025. We will post the statement at 2 p.m. on our website, and we are also going to have a Luganda translation immediately after here. Thank you very much, Deputy Governor and your team.
Okay, thank you very much, dear colleagues.
Yeah, I was going to I was bringing it to where Dr. Sonko is.
Dr. Sonko, please go ahead with the translation of the statement.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Kenneth. Alipoota y'omumyuka wa Governor Bank enkulu ya Uganda ey'omwezi ogwokubiri 2025. Omumyuka wa Governor n'akakiiko ke ketwakazaako erya Monetary Policy Committee olwaliro nga 6 February 2025 akasigazza akabonero ketwakazaako erya Central Bank Rate ku bitundu 9 n'obutundutundu 7.5 buli 100. Era Governor atangazizza nti ekyo kyesigamye ku kubeera nti enkyukakyuka y'emiwendo gy'ebintu oba mu lufuutifuuti gye tuyita inflation yabadde ku bitundu 4 n'obutundutundu 2 ku 100 nga yavudde ku bitundu 3 n'obutundutundu 9 buli 100 mu mwezi ogw'e12. Atangazizza nti ekyo kyasinzidde ku kuba nti entambula y'abantu oba transport services zeeyongeddemuko mu mwezi guno ogwa January 2025. Naye n'atugumya nti Bannayuganda nti okutwaliza awamu enkyukakyuka y'emiwendo gy'ebintu ebadde efugiddwa bulungi olw'okuba ebyo banka enkulu ya Uganda byezze ekola n'anokolayo akatale k'ebyensimbi akabadde keyongedde ddala okuggumira ekivuddeko n'okuba nti siringi ya Uganda bw'ogigeraageranya n'ez'amawanga amalala ebadde yenywereza ddala n'okuba nti ne kano akabonero aka Central Bank Rate abaali bazze bakatambuza bulungi ne keyongerera ddala okunyweza akatale k'ebyensimbi ne kavaako ebyo bye tulabye mu mwezi guno ogwa January 2025. Governor anokoddeyo n'agamba nti bwe bakuba mu ttooki mu maaso wadde nga balaba nti mu myezi wadde nga balaba nti enkyukakyuka y'emiwendo gy'ebintu ejja kwambukamukko katono mu kiseera ekitali kyewala, naye nga bwe bakuba ttooki mu maaso mu 2025 ejja kuba wakati w'ebitundu 4 n'ebitundu 5 buli 100 mu mwaka guno ogwa 2025. N'anokolayo nti naye singa bino binaabeerawo tuyinza okulaba ng'enkyukakyuka y'emiwendo gy'ebintu yeeyongeddemu katono. Anokoddeyo nti singa ebyenfuna bikula okusungako singa ebyenfuna bikula nga byesigamiziddwa ku kusima n'okuyiikula eby'obugagga by'omu ttaka ne gavumenti okwongeza okuggumiza program zaayo, tuyinza okulaba nga enkyukakyuka y'emiwendo gy'ebintu yeeyongeddeko. N'anokolayo n'ensonga endala 3. N'anokolayo obusambattuko obuyinza okukosa entambula y'ebyamaguzi singa tulaba nti embeera y'obudde etaataaganya ebyobulimi. N'ekirala n'anokolayo nti singa dola ya Amerika yeeyongera okwenyweza ku siringi z'amawanga amalala, ekyo kiyinza okutuleetera okuba nti naffe tukosebwa nga tugula ebintu ku kabeeyi akawaggulu okuva mu butale obulala oba omuzungu kye yakazaako imported inflation. N'anokolayo naye ekirala nti tuyinza okulaba nga enteebereza y'enkyukakyuka y'emiwendo gy'ebintu yeeyongera okukka ng'eyeesigamye ku kuba nti tuyinza okufuna ssente z'amawanga amalala eziwerako ekiyinza okwongera okunyweza siringi yaffe, ekyo ne kireeta nti kituyambako okukkakkanya. N'agamba nti singa n'ebyenfuna by'ensi yonna byeyongera okuserebamukko tuyinza okulaba nga ebbeeyi y'amafuta ekkakkanye, ekyo ne kituyambira ddala n'okulaba nti enkyukakyuka y'ebintu teyambuka nnyo. Gavana ayogeddeko ku byenfuna by'eggwanga n'anokolayo nti okutwaliza awamu bwe bakuba ttooki mu maaso balaba ng'ebyenfuna by'eggwanga bigenda kukula bulungi ddala, era akkaatiriza tebijja kubeera mu mwaka guno ogw'ebyensimbi 2024-2025 bijja kubeera wakati w'ebitundu 6 n'ebitundu 6 n'obutundutundu 5 buli 100 mu mwaka ogwo ogw'ebyensimbi, naye emyaka egiddako be bakubye maaso ttooki balaba nti bijja kutuukira ddala ku bitundu 7 buli 100, ng'ebyo byesigamiziddwa ku kuba nti okutwaliza awamu ebyenfuna byenywezezza, tusuubira okufuna ssente kuva mu mawanga amalala nga tuziteeka mu kusima amafuta n'ebyebiikuulo ebirala ebiva mu ttaka, n'anokolayo nti ne gavumenti programu zaayo zeegenze ekola okwongeza obungi bwa ssente buli maka ge zifuna, ebyobulimi ne ssente ezinaava mu kuyiikuula amafuta. Ebyo gavana n'abinokolayo ng'ebijja okuyambako ku byenfuna by'eggwanga. N'alabula nti wayinza okubeerawo obutatuukiriza ebyo ebiteebeezeddwa nga bisinziira nti singa embeera y'obudde ekyankalana tuyinza okulaba nga ebbeeyi y'emmere yeeyongedde okuba nga erinnya mukko. N'anokolayo nti singa n'okufujjirira ebyo mu ngeri y'ebyensimbi ziba tezizze bulungi nga bwe tulabye nti ssente eziva ebweru w'eggwanga ziyinza okukenderamu, n'anokolayo nti ekyo nakyo yinza okukosa ebyenfuna. N'alokolayo entalo z'obusuubuzi ezinaabeera ziri amawanga agakirimaanyi, tebyo nabyo biyinza okukosa ebyenfuna okutwaliza awamu. Naye n'alambulula nti wadde ng'ogwo guli gutyo basuubira nti okusiga ssente mu kuyiikuula amafuta n'ebyobugagga eby'omu ttaka ekyo kijja kweyongerera ddala okwongera embavu mu byenfuna by'eggwanga. N'alambika nti ne gavumenti bw'eneeyongera okukola by'erina okukola awamu ne banka enkulu ya Uganda ng'ekkiriza oba omuzungu kye yakazaako monetary policy eri accommodative enaayamba ssente okubeera mu katale abantu bazeewole, ekyo nakyo kijja kweyongeramu ddala ebyenfuna amaanyi. N'alogerako nti okutwaliza awamu ebyenfuna by'eggwanga era nga bwakkaatiriza tibijja kukula nga bwe babisuubira, wadde nga anokodde ebyo ebiyinza okubikosaamuko. Era gavana n'awunzika ng'agamba okusinziira ku ebyo byonna ebyenfuna eby'eggwanga ebigenda okubeera n'okutunuulira enkyukakyuka y'emiwendo gy'ebintu, akakiiko ke kasazeewo okuleka central bank rate ku bitundu 9 n'obutundutundu 7.5 buli 100. N'atangaaza nti okusinziira ku bwino gwe banaabajje mu katale kyekizza okwongera okuluŋŋamya central bank rate w'enaabeera mu myezi egijja mu maaso. Mu bufunze byebyo ebimyuka wa gavana byayogedde ku byensimbi mu mwezi guno ogwokubiri 2025.
Weebale nnyo Mwami Sonko. Kaakati tujja kgenda mu bibuuzo. Wabeera wayina ekibuuzo oyinza okusembera kumpi n'omuzindaalo n'obuuza ekibuuzo kyo.
Ndowooza era ekibuuzo kigenda kubeera kyekimu kyagenda okuzza mu lulimi Oluganda nti olutalo mu byenfuna naddala emisolo egyateereddwawo President wa United States Trump giyinza kukosa gitya ebyenfuna bya Uganda nga kwotadde n'ensimbi eziva mu kitongole ekyo ekya USAID ekyaggaddwa mu bufunze kigenda kukosa tutya eggwanga, oba oli awo ndowooza na gavumenti bino ebitunuulira oba Bank of Uganda bino ebitunuulira era ebyogerako ki era bulaki ku byo weewaawo?
Omumyuka wa gavana atangazizza ku nsonga eza ssente ezibadde ziva mu USAID ti nga bwe twalabye abannaffe aba gavumenti ya Amerika abataddewo enkola ey'okujja ssente mu USAID. Bannayuganda abadde bakola emirimu mu USAID abamu naddala abakolayo bayimiriziddwa, abamu ssemirimu girabika ng'egyo gyakoze ki gyavuddewo. Era gavana n'atangaaza nti okutwaliza awamu ne bannayuganda bannaffe abadde bakozesa services ezo USAID zebadde tuwa mu sectors ez'enjawulo ng'ebyobulamu n'ebirala, abo nabo bajja kubeera nga bafunamu okukosebwa mu ngeri eyo. Naye gavana n'atangaaza n'agamba nti of course gavumenti ekyetegereza ensonga eno era egitunuulidde okulaba ngeri ki gyesobola okugyeŋŋanga era engeri ki gy'enaatukosa kijja kusinziira ku gavumenti emiwaatwa gy'enaaba etaddewo okusobola okweŋŋanga ensonga eno. So eyo n'agirambula bw'atyo, n'alambula ne ku ntalo ez'ebyenfuna n'agamba okutwaliza wamu era nakyo kikyali kubanga kikyatambula olw'okuba nti twalabye nti wadde gavumenti ya Amerika yabadde etaddewo emisolo egyo, tulaba nti ate bannaffe basse ku bigere ne basalawo bagende mu nteeseganya awadde ekyokulabirako ng'ekya Canada ne Mexico kwe babadde bababirize emisolo egiwerako, naye olwagize gavumenti n'esalawo baweeyo omwezi bagende mu nteeseganya. So okutwaliza wamu gavana atangazizza nti ekintu kikyali mu kweyobuluza era tujja gavumenti nayo egenda ekyetegereza, mpozi nakkaatiriza nti ng'omukulembeze w'eggwanga wabadde ayogera nti kya muzinzi nnyo singa tusobola okwetongola nga tugenda mu kukola ebintu ebyaffe n'anokolayo ng'eddagala ery'okugema abaana oba n'okugema abantu, singa tusobola okufuna independence eyo tusobola okubeera nga tusobola okweyimirizawo okusobola okuvunuka ensonga zino bwe zinaaba nga zizze bwe ziba nga zizze okusinziira ku bannaffe banaaba batambuza ensonga zaabwe.
Kale tweyanziza Mwami Sonko, translation y'Oluganda, translation ya monetary policy okugiza mu Luganda ekomekezeddwawo.
Thank you.